Hitler's biggest mistake that lost Germany, the war introduction. Adolf Hitler made numerous strategic, political, and moral errors during World War II, but his decision to invade the Soviet Union in June 1941, Operation Barbarossa, is widely regarded as his greatest and most catastrophic mistake. This decision transformed a difficult war into an unwinnable one by forcing Germany into a prolonged, multi-front conflict against an enemy with vast resources, manpower, and industrial potential. While other mistakes, such as declaring war on the United States or interfering in military command, played major roles, Operation Barbarossa fundamentally sealed Germany's fate. Background: Germany's position before 1941. By early 1941, Nazi Germany was in a strong strategic position. France had fallen in just 6 weeks. Western Europe was largely under German control. Britain stood alone and was under heavy bombing. The United States had not yet entered the war. Germany and the Soviet Union were bound by the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, 1939. At this moment, Germany had no immediate need to open another front. The decision to invade the Soviet Union? Ideological motivation. Hitler's decision was driven less by military logic and more by ideology. He viewed communism as a Jewish conspiracy. He believed Germans needed Lebensraum, living space, in Eastern Europe. He considered Slavs racially inferior and assumed quick victory. These assumptions led Hitler to grossly underestimate Soviet strength. Why Operation Barbarossa was a fatal error. 1. Fighting a two-front war, Germany repeated the mistake of World War I. Britain remained undefeated in the West. The Soviet Union opened a massive Eastern front. Later, the United States would enter the war. Germany lacked the manpower, fuel, and industrial capacity to sustain simultaneous large-scale wars. 2. Underestimating Soviet resilience. Hitler and his generals believed the Soviet Union would collapse in 8 to 12 weeks. The Red Army was poorly led and ineffective. Reality proved otherwise. The USSR mobilized millions of soldiers. Soviet industry was relocated east of the Urals. Civilian endurance and patriotism were far stronger than expected. Even after losing millions of troops, the Soviet Union kept fighting. 3. Logistical overstretched. Germany was unprepared for the scale of the invasion. Poor roads and rail systems slowed supply lines. Fuel shortages crippled armored units. Soldiers lacked winter clothing and equipment. When winter arrived in late 1941, German forces were exhausted, freezing, and undersupplied. 4. Hitler's interference in military strategy. Hitler repeatedly overruled his generals. He split forces between Moscow, Leningrad, and Ukraine. He forbade tactical retreats, leading to mass encirclements. He prioritized symbolic cities over strategic objectives. This rigid command style resulted in avoidable disasters, especially later at Stalingrad. 5. The turning point, Stalingrad. The invasion culminated in catastrophe. Over 300,000 German troops were encircled. Hitler refused evacuation. The entire Sixth Army was destroyed. After Stalingrad, 1942-43, Germany never regained the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front. Long-term consequences of the invasion. Massive losses. Over 80% of German military casualties occurred on the Eastern Front. Germany's best troops and equipment were destroyed. Industrial disadvantage. The Soviet Union eventually outproduced Germany. Allied bombing further weakened German factories. Moral and strategic collapse. Axis allies lost confidence. German civilians faced total war and devastation. The Red Army advanced relentlessly toward Berlin. Why this mistake outweighs others. Other errors were significant, but none were as decisive. Mistake impact. Declaring war on the U.S. Accelerated defeat. Holocaust moral atrocity, resource drain, interfering with generals. Tactical failures. Operation Barbarossa. Strategic death sentence. Without the invasion of the Soviet Union, Germany might have prolonged the war or forced negotiations. With it, defeat became inevitable. Conclusion. Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union was the single greatest mistake that lost Germany World War II. It was driven by ideology rather than strategy, based on racial arrogance and false assumptions, and executed without adequate preparation. The result was a war of attrition Germany could never win. Operation Barbarossa did not just fail, it destroyed the foundations of Nazi Germany's military power and ensured its ultimate collapse in 1945. Operation Barbarossa did not merely fail as a military campaign, it set off a chain reaction of disasters that Germany could no longer control. Once the invasion stalled, every subsequent decision Hitler made was shaped by desperation rather than strategy. This part examines how the failed invasion escalated the war, drew in stronger enemies, and destroyed Germany from within. The invasion forces Hitler into total war. From blitzkrieg to attrition, Germany's early successes relied on blitzkrieg, fast, decisive campaigns. The Soviet Union destroyed that model. Front lines stretched over 2,000 miles. Battles lasted months instead of weeks. Victory now depended on production, manpower, and endurance. Germany was not built for a long war of attrition. Declaring war on the United States, December 1941, one of Hitler's most reckless follow-up decisions came after Barbarossa stalled. Why Hitler declared war? Hitler believed the U.S. was militarily weak. America was already fighting Germany. Indirectly, Japan would keep the U.S. occupied in the Pacific. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. The reality: the U.S. possessed unmatched industrial capacity. American factories outproduced Germany and Japan combined. The Allies gained unlimited access to weapons, fuel, and food. Germany now faced three global superpowers: Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. The economic war, Germany could not win industrial inferiority. Once the war became global, U.S. aircraft production alone exceeded Germany's total output. Soviet tank production surpassed German losses. Allied bombing crippled German infrastructure. Germany simply ran out of resources first. Hitler's command style: a war lost from the top, micromanagement, and refusal to retreat. Hitler increasingly took direct control of the military. He ignored experienced generals. He forbade withdrawals even when strategically necessary. Entire armies were sacrificed for ideological stubbornness. Examples include Stalingrad, North Africa. The Eastern Front winter collapses. Each decision compounded earlier losses caused by Barbarossa. The moral and political collapse of Nazi Germany, loss of allies. As Germany weakened, Italy collapsed in 1943. Romania and Hungary sought exit strategies. Finland abandoned the Axis. Germany became increasingly isolated. Resistance and internal strain forced labor systems, strained society. Civilian morale collapsed under bombing. Resistance movements expanded across Europe. The war Hitler started now consumed Germany itself. Why recovery was impossible after Barbarossa? Once the Soviet Union survived the initial invasion, Germany lost the initiative permanently. The Red Army learned, adapted, and modernized Allied coordination tightened. From 1943 onward, Germany was only reacting, never shaping events. Historical consensus. Most historians agree. After 1941, Germany no longer had a plausible path to victory. The invasion of the Soviet Union turned a strong regional power into an overextended empire, a manageable war into a global catastrophe. Conclusion of Part 2. Operation Barbarossa was not just a failed invasion. It was the moment Germany crossed the point of no return. Every later defeat, Stalingrad, Normandy, the bombing of German cities, and the fall of Berlin, can be traced back to that single decision. Hitler did not lose the war in 1945. He lost it in June 1941. After examining how Operation Barbarossa triggered Germany's collapse, a critical historical question remains. Could Germany have won, or at least avoided total defeat, if Hitler had not invaded the Soviet Union in 1941? While no scenario leads to a good outcome for Nazi Germany, many historians agree that avoiding the Eastern invasion would have radically altered the course and length of the war. Germany's strategic alternatives to Barbarossa: 1. Defeating Britain first. Instead of turning east, Germany could have focused entirely on Britain, strengthening the U-boat campaign, targeting British supply lines in the Atlantic, Increasing pressure in the Mediterranean. Britain depended heavily on overseas trade. A prolonged naval blockade might have forced negotiations, or at least weakened British resistance significantly. 2. The Mediterranean strategy. Several German generals, including Admiral Raeder, favored a southern strategy. Capture Malta, push through North Africa, threaten the Suez Canal, cut Britain off from Middle Eastern oil. This approach would have weakened Britain, economically strengthened Germany's access to resources, avoided a massive land war in the East. Hitler largely dismissed this option. 3. Maintaining the Nazi-Soviet pact. By keeping peace with the Soviet Union, Germany continued receiving Soviet oil, grain, and raw materials. The eastern border remained secure. Germany avoided catastrophic manpower losses. Stalin had no immediate plans to attack Germany in 1941. The pact, while uneasy, bought Germany time. Why Hitler rejected these options? Ideology over strategy. Hitler believed the Soviet Union had to be destroyed eventually. Bolshevism was Germany's mortal enemy. The war was a racial struggle, not just a military one. This worldview made compromise or delay unacceptable to him. The limits of German victory. Even without Barbarossa, Germany's structural weaknesses. Even without invading the Soviet Union, Germany faced serious challenges. Inferior long-term industrial capacity compared to the U.S. dependence on imported oil, occupation costs across Europe, growing resistance movement, the Eastern Front, the true deciding theater of World War II. Introduction to Part 4. While popular memory often emphasizes D-Day or the fall of Berlin, the Eastern Front was the real center of gravity in World War II. It was here, across the vast plains of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, that Nazi Germany suffered its greatest losses and where Hitler's fatal mistake fully unfolded. This part explains why the Eastern Front determined the outcome of the war and why Germany could never recover after committing itself there. Scale of the Eastern Front. The war in the East dwarfed all other theaters combined. Over 30 million soldiers fought on the Eastern Front. Front lines stretched thousands of kilometers. Entire cities were destroyed repeatedly. Casualties reached unprecedented levels. Approximately 75 to 80% of German military casualties occurred against the Soviet Union. The Red Army destroyed the majority of German divisions. No other front inflicted comparable damage on Germany. The Red Army's transformation, early weaknesses. In 1941, the Soviet military suffered from poor leadership due to Stalin's purges, outdated tactics, inadequate coordination. These weaknesses encouraged Hitler's overconfidence, rapid adaptation, and learning. By 1942 to 43, the Red Army had transformed, introduced deep battle doctrine, improved coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery, promoted competent commanders like Zhukov, Rokossovsky, and Konev, standardized mass-produced, reliable equipment. The Soviet Union learned faster than Germany anticipated. Soviet industrial relocation, a strategic masterstroke. One of the most decisive factors was industrial relocation. Thousands of factories were moved east of the Ural Mountains. Production continued beyond German bombing range. Output increased despite territorial losses. By 1943, the USSR produced more tanks, artillery, and aircraft than Germany. Losses could be replaced faster than Germany could inflict them. Germany, by contrast, could not replace experienced soldiers. Key Eastern Front turning points. Moscow, 1941, German advance halted blitzkrieg, decisively failed first major strategic defeat. Stalingrad, 1942 to 43. Entire German army destroyed, psychological and military catastrophe. Global turning point Kursk, 1943. Largest tank battle in history, Germany lost its final offensive capability. Strategic initiative passed permanently to the Red Army. After Kursk, Germany was on the defensive everywhere. Hitler's strategic rigidity in the East. Hitler's mistakes became more severe as pressure mounted. Refusal to allow tactical withdrawals, obsession with symbolic cities, increasing distrust of professional generals. These decisions turned defeats into annihilations. The human cost of ideology. Unlike in the West, the war in the East was ideological and racial. Brutal occupation policies, mass executions and starvation, enslavement of civilians. These actions eliminated any chance of local cooperation, strengthened Soviet resistance, turned the conflict into a fight for survival. Germany ensured that no compromise peace was possible. Why the Western Allies could succeed. The Western Allies benefited from Germany's Eastern commitment. German forces were tied down in massive numbers. The Red Army absorbed the bulk of German strength. D-Day succeeded partly because Germany was already bleeding in the East. Without Barbarossa, Allied success in the West would have been far more difficult. Conclusion of Part 4. The Eastern Front was not just another battlefield. It was the arena in which Nazi Germany was destroyed. By choosing to invade the Soviet Union, Hitler committed Germany to a war it lacked the resources, manpower, and strategic flexibility to win. Every road to Berlin ran through the East. Part 5. Lessons, Responsibility, and the Final Judgment. Introduction to Part 5. Operation Barbarossa was not only a military failure, it stands as one of the clearest examples in history of how ideology, arrogance, and absolute power can destroy even the strongest states. This final part examines the broader lessons of Hitler's decision and delivers a final historical judgment on why this mistake proved fatal. Lesson 1. Ideology is not strategy. Hitler's worldview replaced rational planning with belief. Racial theories shaped military decisions. Political enemies were seen as inherently weak. Victory was assumed, not calculated. Modern historians emphasize that Germany lost the war the moment ideology replaced realistic strategy. Lesson 2. Underestimating an enemy is fatal. Hitler's assumptions about the Soviet Union proved catastrophically wrong. He believed the USSR would collapse quickly. He ignored its industrial depth and manpower. He dismissed Soviet adaptability. History repeatedly shows that wars are lost by those who underestimate their opponents, not by those who lack courage. Lesson 3. Absolute power corrupts military judgment. Hitler's unchecked authority created disaster. Generals were afraid to contradict him. Tactical retreats became political crimes. Failure was blamed on the subordinates. By 1943, Germany's army was fighting both the enemy and its own leadership. Lesson 4. Wars of annihilation create endless resistance. Germany's brutal occupation policies ensured no possibility of cooperation in the East's total civilian resistance. A fight to the death. The Soviet population fought not just for victory, but for survival. Lesson 5. Logistics and industry win modern wars. The invasion exposed Germany's weaknesses: insufficient oil supplies, limited industrial output. Poor logistical planning wars are decided in factories and supply lines, not just on battlefields. Final historical judgment. Most historians now agree. Operation Barbarossa was the decisive error that made Germany's defeat inevitable. Other mistakes accelerated defeat, but none matched the scale or consequences of this one decision. Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union ensured a two-front war, endless attrition, global escalation, eventual annihilation. Germany did not simply lose battles, it lost the capacity to win the war. Conclusion: the war was lost in 1941. Although Berlin fell in 1945, the outcome was determined 4 years earlier. By invading the Soviet Union, Hitler turned a strong but overstretched power into a doomed one. The greatest military mistake in modern history was not a single battle, but a single decision. Part 6. Timeline, Summary, and Final Synthesis. Introduction to Part 6. This final extension consolidates the entire argument into a clear chronological framework and provides a concise synthesis suitable for academic conclusions, exam answers, or research papers. It reinforces why Hitler's decision in 1941 outweighs all other mistakes. A timeline of irreversible defeat, 1939 to 1945, 1939 to 1940. German ascendancy, Poland defeated France, collapses Western Europe, largely under German control. Britain isolated but unbroken Germany is powerful, but already overextended. June 1941, Operation Barbarossa begins largest invasion in history. Initial German victories, Soviet territory captured rapidly. However, the war's character changes immediately. Winter 1941-42. The first strategic failure. Moscow not taken, German forces exhausted and freezing. Soviet counteroffensives succeed. Blitzkrieg is effectively dead. 1942-1943. The turning point, Stalingrad disaster. Sixth Army destroyed, Axis momentum. Collapses, Germany shifts permanently to defensive warfare. 1943-1944. Inevitable decline. Kursk fails, Allied bombing intensifies. Italy collapses, D-Day opens, second front, Germany now fights on all fronts simultaneously. 1945. Consequence, not surprise. Red Army enters Berlin. Germany surrenders unconditionally. Defeat is the result of decisions made years earlier. Why Barbarossa was more than a military error operation. Barbarossa failed on every level. Level failure. Strategic 2. Front war. Logistical supply collapse. Political global escalation. Ideological total resistance. Economic industrial inferiority. No single German victory afterward could reverse these realities. Addressing a common myth. Germany only lost because of winter. This claim ignores key facts. Winter affected both sides. German planning ignored seasonal realities. The Soviet Union fought effectively. Year-round winter exposed German weakness. It did not cause defeat. Final synthesis. One decision, many consequences. Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union destroyed Germany's military superiority, forced global escalation, empowered stronger enemies, eliminated diplomatic options. Every later disaster was a consequence, not a coincidence. Concluding statement, model, answer, style. Hitler's greatest mistake was the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. This decision forced Germany into a war of attrition against an enemy with superior manpower, industrial capacity, and strategic depth, while Britain remained undefeated and the United States later entered the conflict. Operation Barbarossa transformed a limited European war into a global conflict that Germany lacked the resources to win, making defeat inevitable long before 1945. Part 7. Historians debate, counter-arguments, and final evaluation. Introduction to Part 7. While most historians agree that Operation Barbarossa was the decisive mistake, serious historical writing also examines counter-arguments and alternative interpretations. This section strengthens the article by addressing those views and explaining why Barbarossa still stands above all other errors. Major historians on Hitler's greatest mistake. Richard Overy argues that Germany lacked the economic capacity for a long war. Barbarossa accelerated Germany's structural weaknesses. He emphasizes that industrial imbalance, exposed by the invasion, made defeat inevitable. Ian Kershaw highlights Hitler's ideological obsession with the East, his refusal to adapt once reality contradicted belief. Kershaw concludes that Hitler's personality and worldview turned risk into certainty of defeat.